Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Oluwaseun. So today we're going to be discussing DNS. We want to look at an overview. We want to look at the concept of DNS. Alright, we want to see how you can register a domain, what a DNS is, what it does, and all of that. So let's get into the video. Now, a domain name system is fundamental, it's a fundamental technology that allows us to access website using domain names instead of IP addresses. Now, all the websites that we have in the world today, they all have a name. So if I want to go to google.com, what I will simply do is to just type in google.com to my browser in my browser, right? So if I type that inside of my browser, my DNS is going to look up that name, do the resolving to an IP address and then serve me the content that is available, on the server hosting that website. Okay, so that is basically what a DNS is, right? So for example, if I say google.com, now that google.com is actually resolved back behind the scene to an IP address because the site itself is hosted on a server. Okay, so for example, now if I come here and I say ping, google.com, now you can see that my command prompt is returning, to me the IP address of google.com. And that is because what our system understands, is zeros and ones. Okay, in one of the videos we talked about, understanding how IP address works. Okay, so and then we explained in that video that our system actually understands, bits, zeros and ones. Okay, so the google.com that you typed in, in your browser is going to be resolved back, to an IP address because that site is actually hosted on a server. Now that server is configured with an IP address and a lot of other internet protocol, information. Okay, it is not configured with a name. So the DNS is just more like, an additional layer on top of the web server. So basically, when you put in the name, the DNS receives that and then it understands that, oh, okay, this name is actually or actually corresponds to this IP address, right? So it looks at the IP address, it is able to trace the server the IP address belongs to, and then is able to give you back a feedback based on your request. So what a DNS does is basically to take the name and resolve it back to an IP. And one of the important things that the DNS also does is that it helps us to eliminate the need for us as human beings to memorize IP addresses, right? Because IP address can change. So if google.com IP address changes tomorrow, that means I have to memorize a new IP. But if it's the DNS name, the main renames, the name will remain, all right? But if the IP changes, all that is needed to be done is just to take the new IP address and then map it, to the same name. So anytime I go to that name, I have access to the server. So I don't have to memorize multiple names or multiple IP addresses. All I need just to understand one name, and then each time I go to that name, the DNS figures out the IP address associated to that name, and then it serves me, the content. You can imagine if you want to memorize, an IPv6, for example. Now that's quite long, and of course it's hexadecimal. It's not even binary or it's not even decimal, like in the case of IPv4, right? So you can imagine what you will have to memorize. You can imagine the number of IP addresses that you'll have to have on your head, based on the number of sites you want to visit. Okay, but with DNS, all we need to understand is just, okay, I'm going to google.com, I want to visit amazon.com, I want to visit, maybe nigeria.gov, all those kind of things, right? So it's just the name, which makes more sense than for us memorizing IP addresses. Okay, so let's consider some DNS terminologies. Now we have what you call domain registrar. All right, so these are organizations responsible for registering domain names. So we want to register a domain name like, let's say, Sean.com, example.com. All right, you go through a domain registrar to do that. Now, an example of a domain registrar will be GoDaddy. All right, so for example, here, if I type in, GoDaddy, okay, so that's an example, of a domain registrar. Right? So if you go on their website, you can actually register, a domain name, for example. So if you're looking for any domain name right here, you can come here and search for any name. So for example, I can come here and say I'm looking for Sheol.com. All right, and then I'll come here and then I'll search for that domain. Okay, so if it is available, all right, it will show me right here. So for example, this domain is more like a premium domain name and it's going for about $11,000 a year. That's quite heavy. All right, and then you can see other suggestions right here. So there's Shield.ai, there's Shield.co, there's Shield.world, there's Shield.vip. All right, you can see all of them. And of course, you can see the pricing and, everything. All right, like what you have right here. Okay, so a domain registrar basically is where you register your domain name. So once you register the domain name, you fill in your card details, you fill in your information, your address, your phone number, and other things. And then once you register, it will take them maybe 24 hours for that name to be ready, and then you can start using the name for whatever it is that you want to use the name all right for. Okay, but one thing you must know is when you want to register a domain, you go through a domain registrar. Okay. Now, another thing that we also need to know is what you call DNS records. Now, you have a name registered. Okay, you have a DNS name registered. Now, every domain registrar has a service called DNS management. Okay, every domain registrar has a service called DNS management. I mean, quite a number of the popular sites that we know. Okay, they have what you call subdomains. All right. They have what you call what? Subdomains. For example, console.aws.amazon.com, all right, that's a fully qualified domain name, but then it's a sub, all right, of the Amazon.com. So Amazon.com is like the domain name, and then they now have different, all right, extensions before that. Okay, so you create these DNS records, all right, using the DNS management service provided to you by your domain registrar. But let's talk about two of the of these records. Of course, we have quite a number of them, but let's talk about two of them, which I think it's important at this level. We have the A record. So the A record is basically mapping a host name to an IP address. Okay, so the idea is you have a site, you have a web server, okay, and on that web server, you already have your website and everything configured. So how do you expose that website in order for people to have access to it? Now, the web server has an IP address configured on it. Of course, we have said that one of the things that the DNS helps us to do is to eliminate the need for us to memorize IP addresses. Okay, so what do? The website is ready on your site. You can access it through the IP address of the server. But of course, that IP address, it to be difficult for your client to memorize. So what do? You can create what you call an A record. So the name that you have registered with your domain registrar, what you do is basically go to the DNS management section of your domain registrar, take the IP address, create what you call an A record, and then you map them together. So let's take a look at how you do that. So for example, if I go back to my domain here, so I have this domain that I've registered already. So on this side, I will click on manage domain, all right, on where I can see find a new domain. So I'm just going to click on manage domain. All right, now once I click on that manage domain, it will take me to my DNS management page, okay, and then I'll click here on DNS, all right. So I'll click on DNS, and then once I click on that, I can see this button here that says add a DNS record. Okay, so I click on add a DNS record. Now there are different types of records. So if you click here, there's the A record, the AA, the CNAME, the MX, the TX, the SRV, quite a number of records, right? But we're talking about the A record. So if I click on the A record, now it's going to ask me to put a name here. So the name that I can put here can be the name of the new domain that I just registered. So for example, I just registered example, all right, .com. Okay, for example, so that can be the name. So I just registered that. Okay, so that can be the name, all right, of the domain, okay, that I just registered. So that's going to be the name. So I can say example, of course. This is the DNS name that I've registered already, right? So here I can have something like, okay, the name of my, what do you call it now? The name that I registered is, so I can just copy this, all right, and put it here, for example. Okay, and then I can put the value. So the value is going to be the IP address of my server, right? So the IP address of my server can be 168.192, all right, .10.1, for example. Of course, it's going to be a public IP. It's not going to be a private IP, okay? So take note of that. It's going to be a public IP address. Now, so once I do that, I can say save. Now, what it means is that anybody that types the devcloud.xyz, right, what would happen is that that name is going to resolve back to this IP address. So that is what an A record. Okay, so which means instead of people typing this name in their web browser, they will type this in their web browser, and then so the moment they type this in their web browser, it will basically resolve back, all right, to this IP address. Now that resolving, all right, may not be visible on the web browser, all right, but that is what happens behind the scene. Okay, that is what your DNS does behind the scene. So you type in this address, all right, and then it resolves back to this IP address, which is the IP address of the server that contains the information that you're trying to, all right, access. Is that okay? So that's the way, all right, it works. All right. Now, let's try to understand other records. So we have the C record as well, the CNAME record rather. Now, what is the CNAME record and what does the CNAME record, all right, what does it mean? What does it do? Now, the CNAME record is also sometimes referred to as the canonical name record, all right? It's sometimes referred to as the canonical name record. Now, the CNAME record is basically used to map one host name to another host name, but not to an IP address. Okay, so an A record is to map a name to an IP, all right, but a CNAME is for mapping one host name to another host name. Okay, so for example, I have this new host name called blog.example.com, and then I can map that name to or at www.example.com. So which means anybody that accesses blog.example.com, all right, will be redirected to what? To www.example.com. So that is what the CNAME record is. So if you go back to your domain registrar, all right, let's cancel this. So if I click on add a new record, I can come here and say a CNAME record. So I'll click on that. So here it's asking me for the name that I want to use and then of course the value, right? So here I can say I want to use, let's just say example here. For example, that's the name, and then the value is going to be that other host name that I'm trying to map to. So you can see that it's already giving us an example. So it can be www. Let's say, Sheon.xyz, for example. All right. So, which means anytime anybody goes to example.thedevcloud.xyz, is going to redirect them back to what? To www.sheon.xyz. So that's a CNAME record. So a CNAME record is what? It is basically, all right, a record that is used to point to one host name to another, all right, host name. All right, so as you can see from the description here, it says a CNAME record, or a type of subdomain or alias that points to another domain name. Okay, so that is what a CNAME, all right, record is. Now, the use case for a CNAME record is, for example, by the time we get to the load balancing section on AWS, all right, now when you create a load balancer on AWS, your load balancer is going to generate an arbitrary endpoint for you. Now that endpoint doesn't make sense at all, right? It's just some, some names and numbers put together, okay, with the Amazon.com extension, right? So in order for you to make sense of that name and of course to give your client a human readable name, what you do is you actually create a CNAME record. So you map, all right, a host name, all right, from the DNS service, okay, to, all right, the load balancers endpoint. So anytime anybody goes to maybe let's say Sheon.xyz, for example, it just basically redirects back to the endpoint of the load balancer. But of course, like I said, all of that, all of that redirection is not visible on the browser, right? Because I mean, you can imagine Netflix.com, for example, they have quite a number of, all right, servers serving all their clients all over the world, right? But we don't see all of that transaction. We don't see all of that connection behind all those things behind the scenes. Okay. So what we know is we go to Netflix.com, we access it, we watch our movies, right? But behind the scene, there are actually redirections and, a lot of other stuff going on behind the scene. So that's what a CNAME record, all right, is. So one host name is mapped to, all right, another host name. And all right, so we have what you call a name server as well. So a name server basically resolves your DNS query. Now, anytime you register a domain, okay, with any domain registrar, automatically, okay, you get what you call name servers. Now, for some, they give you like 3 different name servers so that if one is not responding, the other can take it up. All right, if one is not responding, you can have another one to serve your client. Okay, so which basically is to say that a name server is basically all right, that kind of server that responds to queries. So somebody's trying to access your website, the name server will receive that and then respond to it. And like I said, if you go here and you scroll all the way down, right? So for example, you can see that I have two name servers here. So which is basically generated the moment I registered, all right, my domain. So here I have this one, and then I have ns25.domaincontrol.com, ns26.domaincontrol.com. So these are my two name servers. So anytime anybody is going to the devcloud.xyz, this name servers, all right, they are the servers that will respond to that query. And you can see here that this cannot be deleted, they can't be modified. All right, we can't change it, okay? Because, I mean, they are basically the servers that respond to queries. So anybody that is going to my website, the name server will handle, all right, all of that request and provide responses to them. Now, there are two types of name servers, right? So you have the authoritative and you have the non-authoritative. So authoritative, all right, an example of an authoritative name server is this one that we have, all right, this DNS management that we have. And the reason it's authoritative is because we can actually make changes, all right, to that server. That is why it is called authoritative. All right, you can actually update the record, okay, just like we've been creating records. So you have an A record, you have a CNAME record, all right, those are things you can do, all right, with an authoritative server. Now, the non-authoritative server is basically a kind of name server that, basically just catches content from an authoritative name server, right? So they can be modified, okay, but of course you can use them, all right, together as well. So now, another terminology that we need to be familiar with is what you call the top level domain. Now, we have different domains, all right, like we saw here, where we're trying to do some kind of registration. So you can see shown.ai, shown.co. Now, this .co, this .ai is what you refer to as a top level domain. Now, your domain registrar does not manage that record, okay? It is managed by the ICANN, okay, Internet Control Assigned Number Authority. So it's the body that is in charge of all of these things. Now, in the networking video, all right, we talked about this ICANN, all right, and the IANA, which is the Internet Assigned Names Authority. All right, so the .ai, .co, .com, .net, all right, all of these things, they are what you call a top level, all right, domain, and it is managed by the IANA. Okay, so the registrar does not manage that, right? They don't manage all those top level domains. So what they manage is what you can refer to as what? The second level domain. So that is what they manage. So second level domain will be Shield.com, all right, Shield.xyz, Amazon.com. So those are second level domain. So those are domains that you actually register. Okay, you actually register those ones. Okay, those are the domains that you register. So they are referred to as what? Second level domains. Okay, so if you look at this example, all right, you have your .com, which is your top level domain. You have your SLD, which is your second level domain, which is the example.com. And then you can also have a subdomain. Now, a subdomain is not a registered domain, right? So once you have a domain that you have registered already, okay, what you do is from your hosting site, right, you can actually create a subdomain, right? So which means you don't have to pay for that separately. You don't have to, register that separately. Okay, it's just basically more like what you can call, an extension of your name, right? For example, if you look at this GoDaddy right here, I have DCC, all right, .godaddy, all right, .com. Now, what does that mean? So the DCC there is what? Is a subdomain for the GoDaddy.com. So the GoDaddy.com is the second level domain. The DCC dot, all right, is just a subdomain, which means, and one advantage of a subdomain is that can host other applications, right? If you want to do some kind of redirection or you want to host another application, you can have that. For example, some organization, for example, in a university, you can have something like portal dot, the name of the university.com. Now that portal is where they manage the student record. So the main university website, which is the second level domain, can just be to host, all right, the university's website, okay, information about the university. But the subdomain can then be, all right, for their portal and then for other things, okay? So that is that. So they complete. So here you have the HTTP, which is the protocol that you use to access the site, which is HTTP, and sometimes it can be HTTPS. So the whole address is what you refer to as a URL. All right, a universal resource locator. All right, so that whole address is notionally referred to as what? A URL. All right, so let's understand how DNS works. Okay, so for example, you want to access a web server. All right, the web server address is 9.10.11.12. So that's the web server you want to access. Now, on your own web browser, you put in that address, which is example.com. Now, what happens is that a request is sent to your local DNS server, which in most cases is managed by your internet service provider, your ISP. Okay, they manage that for you. So it is sent to the local DNS. Now, if the local DNS is not aware, all right, of the example.com, if it has not catched that before, all right, what it does is that it sends that request to the root DNS. All right, so the root DNS is managed by your ICANA, all right, Internet Control Assigned Numbers Authority. So they manage the root DNS. So the root DNS starts with a dot. All right. Now, the root DNS will say, oh, well, I am not aware of example.com, but I have a name server, all right, that has .com registered. So the root DNS is going to send you, all right, the IP address, all right, of the name server and say, well, maybe you should check this address to see if you are able to find, all right, example.com. But I know about .com, but I'm not sure about example.com, right? So your local DNS will take that response and then send another request to your top level domain, which is the .com now, all right, because the root DNS has given it the address of the .com. So it's going to send that request to the top level domain, which is managed by the IANA, all right, and that one looks at it and says, okay, well, I don't know about example.com, but of course I know about .com. I am aware, all right, of .com, but then I can give you the name servers, all right, of these .com. So it gives us the name server's IP, all right, and then the local DNS takes that again and then, all right, sends the request to the second level domain, which is now the actual registrar, all right, the actual registrar, all right. So that one takes a look at that and say, oh yes, example.com is actually, all right, I'm the one that actually registered it. So this is the IP address of example.com. And then that request goes back to the local DNS, and then the local DNS returns that request back to the web browser, and then we can have access, all right, to the resources of the website. Now, all of this process may seem long, but of course it happens within seconds, in fact, milliseconds. Okay, it happens within milliseconds. And then the moment the example.com IP address reaches your local DNS, all right, that address is cached. So the next time somebody on the network is trying to access the same site, of course, your local DNS is already aware of the IP. It just basically serves, all right, your client that information. So that is basically how DNS works. And that is why if you don't have a proper DNS configured in your work environment, for example, you won't be able to access the internet. Even if you have internet access on your system, if you don't have a proper DNS, you won't be able to access, all right, any website, because the DNS is what does the resolving, okay, of the name to IP address, all right, before it goes over your network, and then you can access your resources. So that's basically what a DNS is. I believe this has been informative for us. If you have any question, all right, don't hesitate to put it in the comment section, and then I'll try my best, all right, to answer your question. Thank you so much for